Good morning. This is Deacon Baylor doing our Sunday school. We're finishing up the first month of what we were talking about as wisdom. Wisdom has been our topic for the last 4 Sunday mornings, and so we're finishing it up. To give you a review, we looked at wisdom in Proverbs, and we looked at wisdom, we looked at the call of wisdom, we looked at the value of wisdom, and we looked at the gifts of wisdom. And now we get to wisdom called feast, but what I put down, the wisdom banquet versus the folly banquet. And we'll be able to break those down and look at those. So remember that the call is called for you for wisdom. And we'll look at this and look at the reference that it takes place, but we're talking about reference God calling individuals. And then we look at the value of wisdom. We know the value of knowledge and the value of wisdom and the value to understand the instructions is very, very, very solid in our lives. It said people perish for the lack of knowledge, and people do perish because they don't know how to get through certain situations. That's why we always have to teach our kids the great things of wisdom, common sense, and things of that nature, so they can help us get through life and make it important for them. In the gifts, being able to discern certain things, being able to have a vision to look ahead. And the most important thing with the gift is that God gave it to you so you have a strong foundation that you can build on and that you can go with. So those are important. So we look at the feast of wisdom. The feast of wisdom, what we'll look at today is that we're looking at, and it's in the Proverbs, the 9th chapter. And it's starting at the first verse. And I'll read this. And wisdom has built her house. She has rolled out her 7 pillars. She has killed her beast. She has mingled her wine. She has also furnished her table. She has sent forth the maidens. She's cried upon the high places of the city. Whoso is simple, let to him enter as he for him wanted understanding. She said to him, come and eat bread and drink the wine that I have made. Forsake the foolish and live, and go in the ways of understanding. Reprove not the scorner, lest hate thee rebuke a wise man, and he will love thee. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will yet be wiser. Teach a just man, and he will increase learning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding. A foolish woman is clamorous. She is simple and knoweth nothing. For she sat at the door of the house, on a seat in a high place of the city. To all the passengers who go right on their way. Whoso simple, let him turn here, and for him that wanted understanding, she said to him, stolen waters are sweet, and bread eaten in secret pleasant. But he that knoweth not the death are there, and that the guests are in depths of hell. So you see in the first, from 1 through 9, you see 1 through 5, you see the difference of we say wisdom, and then after you go from 13 down to 18, we also see the difference of folly. So you see the two differences if you read and look at it. And so when we look at this, but I want to read this, and as I was doing some study and I was looking at some stuff, I want to read this because this, I think it gives us a better understanding what's taking place. It gives us a better understanding of how we operate and we look at things and how we should make adjustment in those things with our life with Christ. Because the bottom line is the life of Christ, and that Christ is our pillar, Christ is our comfort, and Christ is our foundation. So let me read this to you. This writer writes this, and he says, he's talking about wisdom, and he's talking also about folly. Now, when we talk about folly, for who you not know, we're talking about evil, we're talking about Satan, we're talking about on that side of their differences. So that's what we're talking about here, because we're going to you'll see it when I read this to you. And he says this, both appeal to elements in the nature of man, talking about wisdom and folly. Man is a compound and complex being. He possessed a moral nature, a conscience, which can be satisfied only with moral truth and goodness, to which wisdom appeals with her wine and bread of God's revelation, and whose craving they alone are able to please. Now remember the symbols in here that we understand. We'll look at the symbols. And he has sinful inclinations and passions which hanker after forbidden things, to which folly appeals when she sets forth the attraction of her stolen waters or her bread eaten in secret. And that's in the verse 17. God's wisdom and love are shown in appealing to the first, and Satan's cunning and malice are manifested in the aptitude of the appeal in the second. Both invite the same kind of character. The simple, the inexperienced, those who have not tasted the sweets of godly living, yet know not, for experience that he's dead or in the house of the folly, that her guests are in the depths of hell. That's in verse 18. So you look at this, because another example you look at this, when we look at this, is we take the imagination, we look at a wheel, and potter is molding this pot. And so this is what we're talking about here in reference to this, because as a potter molds a pot, the potter molds that pot into the pot, or we can say that vessel that they wish to have. Well, man is in the same situation here that we look at, is that God has created a man, but since sin has came upon, now the molding is take place in difference, because you look at that, when I read that, the nature for man is goodness and moral. However, though, he has inclinations and passion for the faults. And we'll look at that, because when we look at these verses, we'll look at that, because we talk about Lady Paulus, okay, invitation to the banquet. And we talk about that. So we'll look at this wisdom, because what wisdom we look at here is that as we conclude, like I said, this section of wisdom we talk about, we make it clear. She makes it clear. First, we'll make it clear that wisdom and folly continues vices for human alliance. Second, the ultimate choice lies with us, which we will answer. To those who invite, we respond, and to those who choose to eat. And then third, scoffers will be hardened away and shows that they do harm the teachers that challenge them. Fourth, the wise are open to wisdom message, and even her rebuke will be spark their affliction. So we look at, and then we say behind the wisdom invitation of God, it says yes to wisdom is reverence obedient unto God. So when we look at that, and we understand in this closing, we see those different things that we deal with. We got a pool, and if we don't understand that we have a pool, we don't understand what's going on. And like I always said, you gotta look at yourself and evaluate yourself. What's your strengths? What's your weakness? What you inclined to fall to, and what are you standing firm on? So when we look on this, is that because wisdom has built her house, she built her house on pillars, a strong foundation. She built her house on pillars that are strong and supportive. And the seven we talk about is the fullness or completion of what she's saying. That's another symbol. Think about another symbol. 7 and the pillars, we think about it, is another symbol that we look at in our Christian walk. She also is a picture of an industrial active woman. She contrasts to the foolish woman. You can see the difference of the houses. The foolish woman has a simple house. As we will read later on, she's got a simple house. Wisdom was built a comfortable and permanent place for herself to live, in contrast to folly, which is associated with death. So you see the two. A strong foundation. You have no wavering within it. You have some security within it, and you have something they said is work in it. Now, when you look at this, we're talking about in reference to women and folly, and we're using it in the feminine sense, is that she's built a strong foundation, and we look at folly as to look at it more as a harlot in this situation. So we have to look at that, pay close attention to it. The reference verses that reference chapters that helps you understand is If you go back and read chapter 5 and read 7, you can see what it is about the fallen woman and how she attracts. So you can see that in those situations. And so now we go to the second verse. She has killed her beasts, she has mingled her wine, she has also furnished her table. So she's brought in the great foods for the people. She has sent forth the maidens. She cried upon the high places of the city. Remember, symbols, high places of the city. Wisdom sent forth her people to feast. She sent for an invitation. It's an invitation. It's an invitation to this great feast. And then we go to the fourth verse. Whoso is simple, let him turn to hither. As for him that wanted understanding, she says to him. And fifth, come eat of my bread, and drink of the wine which I have mingled. Forsake the foolish, and live, and go in the way of understanding. These verses here are at the banquet, and wisdom is crying out first to all people in verse 4, and then to the simple and foolish in verse 5. Now she calls out to the simple, those who are prudent and inexperienced, to gain wisdom, to gain knowledge. She also invites them to come in to eat her bread and drink her wine, implying that wisdom is that which sustains the soul. To eat and drink at wisdom's table is to begin to travel the path that leads to life understanding. It is walking on a straight path understanding. You know, it's interesting when because that's what we used to do. We don't do it anymore. When we used to sit at the dinner table and we were able to sit down and talk. That's when our parents was able to share knowledge to us, wisdom. We were able to talk about certain topics, certain things taking place. We were able to have that cohesiveness, that togetherness that we said. And here in this invitation, she said, is basically she's talking about God has sent the maidens out and sent us out, and we're inviting people to come in and receive the word of Christ. So look at the symbols. You can compare the symbols here. Now we go on. We're going to the 8th verse. Reprove not the scorner. Let hate them rebuke to wise man, and he will love thee. Give instructions to a wise man, and he will be yet wiser. Teach a just man, and he will increase in his learning. When he talks about a scorner, he's talking about one that's arrogant, one that doesn't want to understand the word of God. The verse shows us that it's talking about people that are atheists or does not want to deal with the word of God. So he's pretty much saying, she's saying, the writer saying, don't waste your time with those individuals. Because those individuals will eventually pull you down, and eventually you'll get in a situation where it becomes an argument or debate over this. And it says, don't waste your time with those individuals. Remember in Matthew 7:6, it says, is that this which is holy unto dogs, neither cast it your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn again and rend you. So that's what the example says in that. But it's because the scorner's heart is hardened, they mock wisdom, they have nothing to do. We've seen this throughout the last few months. Okay, so we've seen this, so let's understand that. So in practical, we see that. But a wise person, the characteristic, they're willing to learn. So you're teaching a person and being able to inspire to give a person some knowledge, some information, because they're looking for it. Their desire to spend time, because when they make a sacrifice to come and spend time with you as you provide them with the information and knowledge, they are more valuable than the scorner who pushes it away. So we look at the student loves rather than hate the teacher. A person who wants to be wise is aware of the benefits of instruction, very open to any kind of guidance that increases their learning. Very simple in that. The reader then invites into a story, not that as one who teaches wisdom, but one who can potentially be taught. And that's the thing that we look at. And he says, fear of the Lord is the beginning. We've heard this before. We heard this in our first chapter. We heard this in our second chapter. We heard that of Proverbs I'm talking about. We heard it in our last one in chapter 8. And so we hear it now again, repeated, is that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And we're not talking about, some of you that might not understand fear, we're not talking about a point of being beat or a point of fearing something's going to happen. The fear is a reverence, awe, implying is that is a proper human response to the Holy One, Yahweh. Is to rely you are under another power. If you have a positive relationship with that authority figure, recognize the power to become awe. It's giving reverence to God. It inspires us to grow in wisdom and reach out to others. The fear of God overcomes the twin evils of pride and core trials of a foolish person. So that's what we talk about with reverence of God. We talk about the fear of God as the beginning of all wisdom and the knowledge of all understanding. Being able to discern things that goes on. It touches that moral conscience of our body that we talk about. It's not in reference to passion, but the moral nature of man. The structure of man and the foundation of man. They help man to understand, is able man to discern within what we'll see in folly, is make this discernment of what is good and what is bad. And we'll come back to that. Because it says here in 13th verse, a foolish woman is clamoring, she is simple and knowing nothing. Okay? See the difference already? See, when we talked about the beginning of wisdom and the knowledge of the holy is understanding, she is simple. Now, it's not simple in the sense that she doesn't know anything. Let's understand that. Now, she's ignorant to the word and she's working the evil, but it's not in the sense that she is simple in that she doesn't understand anything. Is that her stuff is not knowing of what is good and what is sound to the word, because she's working with evil. Evil is in reference to pride. Okay? Evil is in reference to the opposite of God. So she's going to do the opposite of what God does. Okay? So here. So we look here. Folly is unable to control herself. She is loud, ignorant, and knows nothing. These characteristics are against what wisdom is about. A foolish woman, or literally translated the woman folly, depict contrast to a lady wisdom, between whom the virtuous man has to make a choice. She is characterized as animated by passion and glamour, as an adulteress. If you go to chapter 7:11, like I mentioned, her ignorance is far more than intelligent adequate. She is infecting all who listen to her, and with her own folly, she is opposite of the rival of wisdom. She is simple, a bad sense. She has no she has no provision against evil or no moral fabric to resist temptation. And that's what I've said when we read before, when we talked about the nature of man is good, but he has these passions and he has the inclinations to do what is wrong. And this is what we're talking about here, because we'll look at this and see that she says here, she sits at the door, I'm in verse 14, for she sits at the door of her house on a seat of a high place in the city, just like the wisdom lady, to call passengers who go right on their way. Folly, like wisdom, has a house of her own and invite guests in it. No maidens come out, she invites them in. She does not send forth the maidens. She does not stand in the streets and proclaim her mission. Lady Folly has an easier task. All she has to do is sit and beckon to use few seductive words. Her house is not supported by 7 pillars, but in the grace of God is upheld by the gift of the Holy Spirit like wisdom. And the reason why is that God created everything, and by God's mercy, God allowed them to stay here, and the folly is allowed to be able to operate. That's another deep discussion that we'll get into another time, but for right now, we'll move on. And so we look at her house is the highest, most conspicuous part of the city. She sits before the door, reckless, modest, implying her shameful trade. And so we look at the wisdom cries up on the highest place of it, but with shameful boldness, she cries all to pass by. She addresses her socialization to people who are going straight on their way, thinking nothing of her, having no idea of deepness from her present position. So we look at it. And in 16, whoso is simple, let's turn true to hear. And as for him that wanted understanding, she says, she says to him, stolen waters are sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. The foolish woman personifies of a folly used the very same words that wisdom uttered. The only difference is the difference though. Wisdom addressed the simple because they are inexperienced and undecided and might be guided righteously. Folly now speaks to them because they have not yet made their final choice. They have not made a final choice, can still be swayed by lower considerations and may be led astray. So we look at this and see the difference of they haven't made a choice. But here what we look at is that they have no foundation. So she's able, because we talk about, we wonder why people do some things they do, because they don't have a solid foundation. They might not have the understanding, they might not have the knowledge. And we say, well, they should have the common sense. Well, like we said, common sense ain't common. If you ain't taught common sense, then you don't have common sense. If you're not taught certain things, morals, then you don't have the morals. If you don't able to distinguish from what's right and wrong on a consistent basis, then you can't understand and you can't make the decision. That's why when I read that writer says, is that we have a natural to do good, because Paul talks about it. Every time he wants to do good, he had a pull of evilness. He had a pull of desire, what he used to have in the past. And so that's the pull that we talk about that takes place. And we have to be very careful on it and be able to sound in our understanding of it. So here, he's, and when we go on, he says, stolen waters are sweet, and bread eaten in secret and pleasant. And we look at this as that unstable and senseless, she furnished her guests with stolen bread and water to the determined. Stolen water, still water here suggesting is drinking from your own well. But here, that's in verse chapter 5:15. But the metaphor here is talking about adulterous intercourse. What she's talking about is that now she has seduced, we'll talk about a man who has been married, and she has seduced him into intercourse. So what he says here is that he stole the water, which is a foundation which the man had, and stole the water. Stolen, talk about an adulteress, she was married. Good thing if we look at this, and I mentioned this a couple weeks ago. Genesis, I think it's in the 39th chapter, I can't remember, but in reference to Joseph. Remember Joseph, the son of Israel, and he had 11 brothers, and he told him that he would be ruler over them, and he became ruler, and he interpreted a dream, and now the king had him as a servant working for him in Egypt, and the king's wife tried to seduce him, and he left and ran out, but she said that he left his garment and attacked him, and he was put in prison. Well, he acted off of wisdom, because he acted off of wisdom, and he had a moral standard that he had set up with God. She was actually folly, if you want to look at it in it and put it together. And because all she was looking at is the glamour of seducing and having him do this. And it would have been a total destruction. And you would say, well, Deacon Baylor was a total destruction anyway. He ended up in prison. Yeah, he ended up in prison. But if when you look at it and read the chapter in prison, based on his moral, let's say, presence and moral standard and his position within God, the guard found fit not to treat him as another prisoner. So that's the importance we see of being wise and being discerned. If you know you're weak in a situation, us men in situations, we should not be in certain situations. Our thing is that if we're married and have a relationship, it should be with our wife. We shouldn't be in certain places. I shouldn't be up near the house of the harlot based on her being seductive and things of that nature. We should not be in certain places that we can't control ourselves as far as gambling. We shouldn't be in a casino. Because it's almost the same example of being in a situation we're not strong enough to be in that. And that's the wisdom, be able to discern. Because we'll say, okay, I can handle it. And if we really look at it, 9 out of 10 times, we fall in those situations. If we get caught in those situations. So stolen water and eats in secret. So she sits in secret. You know, we always, when we do something, if we sneak and steal or do something, we do it in secret. We try to hide to do it. We make sure people are not looking. We make sure that certain people are not told. So when we see this, it's because bread eaten in secret places. Folly has a secret meal, simple food, which is different from the rich, which is satisfying and comforting. So you see the difference of the food. Meat is satisfying. We look at it, she had beef and wine, which is satisfying. But here, folly has simple, just bread. Folly gives it poor, it means poor, mean, and it is despicable. Yet the latter has a charm of being forbidden. Okay? The easy attains the possession of which is gotten before without effort, or danger, breach, or resistance, some cease to charm. Young men enter into folly's house, not knowing that the deal are there are none in the house that can be considered to be living. Wisdom banquet leads to life, while folly's banquet leads to death. The wise hear, and the spirit is saying. So we look at that, so you see different. Wisdom has life. It brings upon us life as we look upon it. Well, folly is death because of sin. We look at God and we look at sin, and we know this is death, this is sin. Because you look in the 18th verse, it says, but he knoweth not that the dead are there, and that her guests are in deep of hell. When we get caught up in making bad decisions, things of that nature, we fall into situations and we don't understand that where it's taking us down to, what road it's taking us down to. We've heard that term, that road of hell that we travel through. Well, wisdom gives us the understanding. Going back to it, it gives us the foundation. It helps us to understand those things. And that's why we constantly continue to talk and bounce things off each other. And that's why God has given us understanding to reference that. But when we make the decisions we make, because remember, it's folly versus wisdom. And you got to look at, see what is the benefit. Folly deals with our inclination, our passions, that what we like. Where wisdom deals with the nature, the moral foundation. And so we have to look at those and see those pulls. Because right now we're in a situation where everybody wants to continue and go back, quote, to what is normal. What is normal life we live. But they're not making the decisions on how to do that or continue to discipline themselves to be corrected into doing what needs to be done. And so you have to look at that and see, yes, things are going to change, and you have to make those adjustments with the change. And like I said, do you want this really to be the norm? And if it is the norm, are you willing to be smart to make the adjustments in this time? So that's what we have, the question that we have to ask ourselves. You have a choice. What banquet would you want to go to? Everybody would want to go to this banquet, but they want to operate in this banquet or have these characteristics. But you can only do one or the other. And that's what we have to remember. We can only do one or the other. So I thank you again for this morning. May the word of God dwell richly in your heart and soul this morning. And we'll be able to close now. But what we'll do is that wisdom, we're going to study wisdom out of the Gospels in our next month study. So close. Thank you, O gracious God, for this day. We thank you, Heavenly Father, again for your word. Forgive me, Lord, for not opening up and asking you for your guidance of this word this morning. Forgive me for not addressing you, Lord, as being the Lord that will give us the wisdom and knowledge that we have. But we pray now, Lord, that you guide us and that you be with us as we go along this journey. And in the Son's name we pray, amen.